Face it, we've all been a little nervous in a job interview. You either do or don't get the job. But if that interview is in front of an editorial board, they also take down everything you say, write it up, and print it in the newspaper the next day. That's one of the roles Harold Levy played in his distinguished career. He's covered major stories, many of which he's extremely proud of, and made a difference. He's been a columnist, and he's been a general reporter. And that's what makes Harold Levy a master of the art of journalism. Welcome, Harold Levy. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to be here, Allan.
You know, it's kind of turning the tables on you. You spent a lot of years asking people questions in order to write your editorials, and you seem to willingly give yourself up to being asked questions. You don't seem to mind this. A lot of journalists are shy of that sort of thing.
I don't mind that at all. I just learn a lot whenever I talk with anybody. I learn a lot when I answer questions.
All right, let's start at the beginning. I always think of an editorial board writer as the older, august sage in the newspaper, but you tell me you had a very unusual career of starting out on the editorial board. How'd that happen?
Well, I was working in Ottawa at the Law Reform Commission of Canada, and I had a mixture of administration work and research, and I'd been writing for the Star for years, insight pieces. And I wanted to come back to Toronto. One day the telephone rings, and it's a man named Ian Urquhart, who was putting together a new editorial board. And he said, Harold, we're putting together an editorial board. We'd like to know if you would like to join it, if you'd like to work for the Toronto Star in the editorial board. And I said, I'll call you back, Ian. And I think within hours I called back and said, absolutely yes.
And how long did that position last?
I think 9 years on the editorial board. And then I moved into the newsroom.
And then back to the editorial board?
I never went back to the editorial board. I stayed in the newsroom until my retirement in 2006.
All right, let's go back to the first thing, writing insight pieces. All kinds of people feel they have a perspective on something, a burning social, political, economic issue they want the world to know about. They wish they could get into the newspaper. Where do you advise them to try? Is it the weekend? Is it the feature? Is it a section? What works?
I tended to write for the insight page. And the insight page tended to be either the page before the editorial page or next to the editorial page. But it was very close to the page where people went for ideas. People who were interested in learning new things. People who wanted to have their minds excited a bit. People who wanted to learn things they weren't aware of, who were open-minded. And that's where I would write.
All right, now what is the pitch? I mean, before the name Harold Levy is known by anybody, you're just another person calling, writing, emailing, faxing, or whatever the technology is. How do you get that first successful pitch?
Well, when I was at university, Henry Morgentaler, Dr. Henry Morgentaler was being prosecuted. I think he'd been acquitted by 3 juries. He was coming up for a trial in Toronto, and I approached the Toronto Star. They're putting together a team to report. I wasn't even a member of the staff of the Star, but I said, can I be part of your team? I would like to do analysis and insight because I'm fascinated by these issues, and I think I can explain them to the people at large.
And your bona fide was a law student?
Yeah, I wasn't even, I don't think I was even in law school at that point of time. I may have been, I'm not quite sure of that, but my bona fide is that I had started writing, serious writing about legal issues at the age of 13.
All right, so you had to tell them this background, that you were serious about it, you'd studied about it, you'd written before.
I had written before. By the time I was 20, I had reported the Watts riots in the United States, the first major race conflagration in America, and I'd reported the Adolf Eichmann trial.
And you went down there to look at the Watts riots?
No, I was driving with my wife, with Marlene, through North America, and we landed about a half a mile away from the Watts ghetto, about 6 hours after the riot erupted. I called the Toronto Telegram, John Bassett, who was the publisher. He said, Harold, report twice a day, you can file stories. And I filed for a week and came back, and they'd run all my stories with the byline and with pictures, and I had the taste, Allan. It was wonderful.
And you happened to be in Israel for the Eichmann trial?
I was living in Israel at the time. I'd already written extensively on Jewish issues, on political science issues related to Israel. And I approached the same magazine I'd written before, and they said, if you can get qualified there, you can write for us.
All right. Now, as you lawyers say, in fairness, when you
Yes,
don't want to be
in
fair.
fairness.
When you don't want to be fair.
Exactly.
All that I must discount because not everybody can find themselves in the middle of a major story like Watts or just happen to be in Israel. So how does the average person in an NGO, in a corporation, or a citizen with an issue make that kind of pitch?
I think it largely depends on the nature of the pitch. If it's something you believe, it's something you understand, if it's something that you can convey to other people what's at stake and the importance of the issues, then you can convey it if you have the intelligence and if you have the belief and the understanding of what you're talking about.
So editors and journalists are sitting there going, well, in a nice way, who cares? What's this got to do with my readers? Why now?
Right, and your job is to make the editor, to make the inside editor, the editors of the paper say, hey, this is important. Why didn't I think about it before? The issue is wider than I thought, it's more complex than I thought. Perhaps we should start putting this before our readers.
And these criteria apply to the weekend section, the travel section, the business section, wherever.
You could put me on the comics. I just want to be in that paper. I'll probably be better read on the comic page, Alan.
All right. Big mystery.
Yes.
Solve it, please. What does op-ed mean? I've heard opposite editorial. I've heard opinion editorial.
It is.
What's
It's
it mean?
essentially a column that appears on or around or near the editorial page.
So op isn't necessarily an abbreviation for opposite or opinion?
I think it may be an abbreviation for either. I've never researched it, Alan, but I've written many op-eds in my life.
All right. Well, if you don't know, it doesn't care.
Right.
It doesn't matter. I had an old news director, albeit in television and radio, who said no one could explain to him how a newspaper could have vehement opinions on one page and what they purported to be objective news on the other page. So would you please explain that for me?
I can explain it in this way, Alan, that there's supposed to be an iron wall, an iron curtain separating the editorial part of the newspaper from the news part of the newspaper. So the people writing the editorials are not the people going out and writing the news stories. So the news stories can be free and untainted by the position that the newspaper holds on the issue.
Except at the Windsor Star, where a reporter could write an editorial, put his or her name on it, and it might even appear on the front page. So there are newspapers that break that tradition, aren't there?
There are newspapers that break the tradition. I don't think that's wise. I really think we should keep that line very, very strong.
Yet you went from the editorial board to the newsroom.
That is correct.
And that's okay.
That is absolutely fine. And I'm glad I did. I need to do news. For 9 years, I was one of the anonymous writers of the Toronto Star.
Now, again, to be unfair, as you lawyers say,
Please.
in fairness,
Yes.
there's also supposed to be a Chinese wall, if you will, or an iron curtain or an iron wall between the advertising and the newsroom. But your first boss, John Bassett, is reported to have given his friends in the Eaton family ads and a favorable news story at about the same time in the Old Telegram. And you can see that on TV, and one suspects that happens a little more than we think.
Well, to refer to you as my learned friend, knowing well that you are, I would say that, of course, can happen inside newspapers. But I don't think it should. If the public is going to respect the integrity of the newspaper, of the publication, that's a type of abuse that is destructive and certainly counter to the interest of the paper.
Or maybe it's just a natural use of one's privileged position if you own a newspaper. Freedom of the press is for those who own one, said A.J. Levy.
Right, but we have to draw a line between use and abuse. And I think it's a sign of disrespect to the reader to allow advertising considerations to affect the news content, loud and clear.